Hello everyone. Today we're going to talk about another security lecture, lecture number 20 in the sequence. This lecture is about security standards and regulations. So what we're going to discuss today, or we're going to go over some of the um, standards and regulations relevant to the security. And we will start by talking about the standards first. So uh, there are several standards used by by enterprises um, to show mainly to show the customer and users their commitment to security, right? So the standard by definition is not something that's mandatory. But there are several organizations that recommends these standards, and for those companies and other type of organizations that like to show their commitment to security, they follow one of these or sometimes multiple of these standards. All right, so uh, the standards that we're going to talk about today, mainly they provide the organizations with some recommendations on how to adhere to security best practices, right? And they do that using several strategies, right? Um, Sometimes organizations that want to follow these standards, they follow them because they are interested in what's called compliance. So they want to show their compliance to security practices. Let's say, for example, um, I am a customer who wants to um, utilize cloud services, right? So I want to put my infrastructure in the cloud. I want to put my application in the cloud. But before I do that, I want to go to the cloud service provider and say, what is your security practices? Show me an evidence that guarantees or that show me that you are following security standards so I can rest assured that my data, my information is not compromised. So sometimes organizations do that because they want to adhere to some contractual or sometimes legislation requirements, right? All right, so some of the examples we are going to talk about today is the ISO um, 27000 series, the SOC series, and PCI DSS, and also NIST standards. So what is ISO 27001? Um, as many other standards, it specifies the requirements for implementing, operating, and improving information security systems, right? And the way it works is it asks the organization, it doesn't tell them what to do in terms of security, like put device here, put an access list here, it doesn't do that. Instead, it asks the organization to respond to a series of um, questions, right? And by responding to these questions, the organization is forced to think about security. So, for example, the ISO 9000, 27001, 27001 asked the organization to identify, did you looked at all the regulations and the contractual applications that are related to security in your business, right? So before you do any business, have you looked at all the regulations? So the response from the organization saying, we did this, we did this, we did this. By doing that, the organization become aware of the security standards. So it forces them to think about it. Has the organization identified the information and processes needed to be protected, right? Not everything needs to be protected, but if you are holding some medical information, well, then medical records, then these have to be protected. If you are holding payroll information, well, these are to be protected. So, what is the information that you are holding and dealing with in your organization that need to be protected? What are the security measures that you're using? Are you putting this information behind a firewall? Are you encrypting it? Do you have the proper authorization levels? Right? So by asking these serious questions and the organization answering them, it become aware to the organization what they need to do, or what's called the gap, like what is missing that they need to finish, right? So here it says the standard does not specify the security control. So as I said, it doesn't tell you put an access list here, or put a password here, or put firewall here. These were called access controls. It doesn't tell you that. It just tells you that you need to be aware of the security issues. So once an organization follows this standard, they get a certification, right? So most of the organizations do these do do they follow these standards in order to get some form of a recognition, and this is a certification that they can post, and they say, well, we are ISO 27001 certified. So their customers or their contractors or their um, other organizations, they know that they are compliant with this. Another similar on the same series. So if you look at the end of the end of these slides, you will see a list of links. So if you go to the links, you will see that there are many 27,000 standards. Each one of them cover different aspects. So I picked only the two that are important. So the 27,002 is different because it provides specific guidelines for 12 security areas. So risk assessment, for example, what are the formal methods to identify and classify risks? We were going to take a look at this in the security course. So we'll look at how we do risk assessment. What is your security policy? So security policy can be a big document that specifies all aspects of security, from what the employee should and shouldn't do on the internet to what is the password policy, to all of that information. Asset management, a human resources policy, physical and environmental security, so locks, cameras, monitoring equipment, all of that. There is something called business continuity management. So you see here that security, sometimes we talked about security as confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So the availability part is really important. So what is the business continuity management? It is the steps that the company needs to recover from any major disaster. It could be environmental, it could be financial, it could be all kind of disruptions, right? So all of this is listed. So of course we're not going to go into details, but you probably need to know the difference between the 27,001 and 27,002 is that one doesn't specify specific controls but asks serious questions. The other one provides specific guidelines for certain areas. So, what do you need to do exactly for access control, for example? What do you need to do for the communication, operating management, and so on? Another very famous standard is called SOC, which standard for Service Organization Control, and it used to be named SAS. It used to be called SAS 70, or part of it was called SAS 70. So again, this kind of standard asks the organization to prepare a report, and the report describes what their control procedures and controls for managing and securing information systems. So not there are three different types of reports specified by the standard SOC 1 report, type 1, type 2, and type 3. So type 1 is specifically for organizations that have or does financial activities, banks, for example, or something like payroll management, right? So many companies, when they handle payroll for their employees, they use the specific another company, right? Instead of printing checks themselves or handling taxes or all of that, they handle or they use another service that does that for them. So if you are in the business of doing payroll, then you have to show that you're handling information in a certain way. So that's the SOC 1 report. SOC 2 has more details related to the security requirements. So and specifically security, availability, integrity, and confidentiality aspects. So 2 and 3 are slightly different from each other, but we're not going to talk about that. What we need to know here is that the 2 and 3 are applicable to all kind of organizations, not just financial. So 1 is for financial organizations, but 2 and 3 for wider range of organizations. So any organizations that needs to comply with security best practices. Third type of standard is called the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standards, or the PCI DSS. This is also one of the very common standards. And it's very common because it handles or it applies to organizations that handle credit card information. Right? And imagine all kind of organizations in Canada here. You go to a bank, not well, bank is special, of course, but you go to um, any merchant, any shop, and you use your credit card. You go to the university, you buy or you pay tuition by credit card. Uh, you may go to um, any 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 type of business and you pay by credit card. Um, you purchase a car with a credit card. So all credit cards can be used for all sorts of things. And credit card are one of the main targets of the hackers. If they get credit card information, they could use the credit card numbers to purchase things themselves. So next to cash, credit card is the most valuable information. So somebody may get hold of credit card information, your credit card information, so they will use the number, even if they don't steal the card itself, but they can use the number to enter the information and buy something from Amazon, for example, right? you receive your credit card statement by the end of the month and you see something that says, well, purchased um, nice boots for $150. Right? So you complain to the credit card company, say, well, this is not what I purchased, this is fraudulent activity, and the credit card company will say, okay, we will cancel this payment. You don't have to pay us anything. This is a mistake, right? So who pays the price? Who actually pays at the end? It's not you, for example, but the credit card company lost money out of this. And there is a chain actually. So you are, if you're not if you're not responsible for the payment, somebody else has to pay because it's already the Amazon did not care. I mean, it or the merchant actually got the money and it, shipped the goods. So somebody else has to pay. Usually, credit card companies they take the losses because of this fraud, because of this stealing. They take the losses. So credit card companies said, okay, let's make sure that credit card information is secure. So we're going to issue a standard and we're going to recommend that any company that deal with credit card, they should follow the standards to prove to their users, to their customers, that they are following good practices. So that's why you see here that um, the standard was actually issued and developed by credit card industry, by the companies like Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and so on. All right. So what does it do? It actually does recommend a long list of um, procedures to protect the credit card information. There are several variations of the standard and several variations of the recommendations. So if you are a small shop, that coffee shop, for example, and you're getting a small number of, or you're getting credit card information to pay for coffee, you the standard or there is a version of the standard that applies to you. If you are a big university and dealing with huge sums of money, and you have to keep credit card information sometimes for a long period because um, you you need to withdraw money every semester for every course, something like that. So the rules apply to you differently, right? So there are different levels for the standard. In general, for all these standards, we have something called compliance process. So what happens? The organization starts by looking at one of these standards and say, we want to follow this standard. We want to this standard apply to us. We want to follow it. So this is the part where they need to understand the framework. They need to understand what the requirements are, right? And then they start applying the controls. These are the actual procedures that they apply to protect the information. This means that, well, in terms of networking, for example, if I focus on networking, okay, so I have a simple router as a gateway to the internet. It's not sufficient to protect my network, so I'm gonna upgrade it and put a firewall. My network, for example, is a flat switched network, layer 2 switch. I may need to apply VLANs or redesign it to include VLANs so I can separate different departments or different types of users. Um, my information is saved on, disks that can be accessed by any employee. Maybe I'll put them in a separate LAN and only access given to specific employees, right? So these are called controls. And then does that mean we're done? No. The third part of this is, okay, so now we did all of this. How far are we from the standard? The standard says this and this and this, and we did other, like several things. Did we comply with the standard? Did we fix all the issues? Did we do all the things that the standard says we should do? If there is gap, so that's called fixing the gaps. If there is a gap, we have to do something to um, finish the gap or to close the gap, right? So some of these standards, I am familiar mostly with the PCI and one of the SOC. So it's not like all or nothing. It's not like if you don't do everything, you don't get certified. Sometimes they will say, okay, we will give you conditional, like you have to have certain levels of compliance, and we will give you certifications, and then we will monitor you. So every 6 months you have to report what you did to comply, right? And then once, after maybe a couple of reports, we start monitoring you every year or every 2 years. So you will hear the term compliance or auditing. Auditing means that you don't just get the certification once and that's it. No, you have to, as the organization has to continue proving that they are in compliance with the standard, right? So usually some kind of audit is done. Some third party comes and look at your controls, ask questions, look at records, all of that, and they will certify you saying, well, you did everything right, you continue to be certified, or you have problems, you have to fix them, right? So the other type of topic we not to talk about is the privacy laws. So these are laws by governments. They are not standards. The standards are recommendations. Not everybody has to follow them, right? But laws are something that everybody has to follow because it's issued by government. So we have here, so I'm talking about Canada in general. So we have um, privacy laws that in general talks about or guarantees people certain levels of confidentiality. So certain laws apply to certain organizations. Some of them are universal, so they apply to everybody. Some of them apply only to a specific type of organizations, right? And also some laws are federal laws, so they apply to any organization or any person across Canada. Some of them are in different jurisdictions. So we have laws in Nova Scotia that apply only to Nova Scotia and Nova Scotian companies, Nova Scotian individuals, but they don't apply to anybody else outside. So, so let's see. Um, so one of the things that the privacy laws protect is the personal information. So the personal information in Canada is defined as any data that can be used individually or by linking it to something else to identify you, to identify you personally, right? So, for example, your race, your nationality, your ethnic origin, religion, um, age, marital status, medical, education or employment history, financial information, your DNA, any numbers like social media, social insurance number, or license. Um, in your case as a student, your student number, the B00 is private. I cannot disclose it to anybody. It's not, we cannot publish it. It's private, right? So, and you shouldn't be sharing it um, unless it's necessary, right? Any views or opinions about you as an employee. So if you are an employee in a company and your boss writes a view about you, right? So this person is doing good or bad or has difficulties or has strengths. This information is personal information and cannot be shared. It's private, right? So all of this, you see that it covers a lot of ground. All of this is considered personal information. So what is not considered personal information? Information that has weak connection to the individual. So, for example, uh, the fact that I live in Nova Scotia or live in Halifax, that's not, there are 500,000 other people live in Halifax. So it's not identifiable if you say something that's somebody lives in Halifax, or if I write about a student at Dalhousie said this. Well, that's not really, there are 20,000 students at Dalhousie, so that doesn't pinpoint to a specific person. Any information about organization is supposed to be public, right? So it's not personal information. Information that has been changed to become anonymous. So if I publish some graphs about student um, student average or student's grade in the class, and but I don't put names, or I put fake names so that nobody knows exactly who the person who got A, who got B, and all. So this is anonymized information that's not personal, right? Any public official, so somebody who works for the government, their information is not supposed to be personal. Um, a business contact information, so my office number, my phone number in the office, that's not personal information. I cannot say don't tell anybody about my office number. No, that's not personal. And government information also is supposed to be not personal information. So one of the main regulations in Canada is called the Privacy Act. The Privacy Act applies or relates to a person's right to access and correct personal information that the government of Canada holds about them. Right? So this means that this law says that I can get access to any personal information being written about me, right? And I have the right to correct it if it's wrong. So information about taxes, information about old age security pensions, information about employment insurance. Some of this probably, if you are not a Canadian resident, you will probably don't understand them, but these are the things that are what you need to understand is this law guarantees you that nobody changes information about you or writes something about you without you knowing. And then there is something called the right to privacy. The right to privacy is almost as the constitution, right, in Canada. So um, this um, law um, tells the government that they cannot collect any personal information um, unless they need it. Right? And also, whenever possible, the information should be collected from the person themselves, not from somebody else. So if they want information from me, they cannot just go to the bank, or they go to another government organization and say, well, what do you know about him? Right? So you can see here the several points. The government may only use the personal information for the purposes that it's collected. So you take the information for tax purposes, you keep it for tax purposes. You don't send it to, um, for example, another organization. Right? Um, of course, there is exception. The exceptions is if there is some kind of uh, um, court order that asks to disclose this information, right? Or if there's some kind of law that says this information has to be shared. So that's the exception. Another regulation. So the Privacy Act and the right to privacy have nothing to do with information security or networking or cyber security or any of that. That applies to a paper and pencil, applies to anything, right? So it doesn't have to be digital information. So if I give my information to uh, the bank, the bank sh- the bank has to maintain my privacy according to these laws, or the government in that case. So the right to privacy and the Privacy Act apply to governments, right? So the act apply only to the federal government. You have to keep an eye on this, right? So in that case, any if I deal with government and I give them my information, regardless of what system they use, that applies to them. When we talk about PIPEDA, that's more related to information technology, right? And actually applies to other organizations, so not the government. I mean, including the government, but applies also to other informations, other organizations. So it's called the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, right? And the act um, sets some rules for how the private sector organizations other than government can collect, use, and disclose personal information. So now back to the example of the bank. The bank can ask you for your address, your phone number, your name, of course, to open a bank account, right? So they can ask for that to open a bank account. But this information cannot be, it's controlled, let me put it this way, it's controlled under PIPEDA, right? So it's that information is not like you collect the information and you tell other people, hey, by the way, that person, well, he just opened a bank account with me, so he must have some money, so maybe you should send advertisement to him. Well, that's abuse of this, and under this act, well, the bank can be sued and can be fined. Now, of course, another thing that I should mention, the difference between standards and regulations. Standards, if you don't follow them, well, you don't get certification, right? That's it. But regulations is different. Regulations, if you don't follow them, you get fined or you get jail or you get punishment, right? So there are some, you can see here that what kind of um, uh, organizations that PPDA apply to. So PPDA apply to the private sector organizations and also applies to personal information of employees of federally regulated businesses. So some businesses in Canada are private business, but follow government regulations. So banks are private, but they follow government regulations. Airlines, telecommunication companies. So that act applies to them too, applies to the employees, not just the employees and the customers of these people, right? There are some exclusions. So if you are a private organization that doesn't do any for-profit business, so a charity, for example, in that case, this does not apply to them. Right? Does that mean they are free to share your information and take your information and publish it? No. We have the Privacy Act that we talked about, or the right to privacy that we talked about earlier, right? So it's not that they are free to do whatever they want. It's just that this law in particular was designed for private business that does profit, right? Um, Also, it doesn't apply to political parties. PIPEDA does not apply to municipalities, universities, schools, and hospitals except if the organization is engaged in commercial activity. So again, university, in theory, universities in Canada, they're not, well, some universities are private, but the universities are somewhat public organizations, right? Because they get funded from the students and they get funded from the government, so they're not private business. So this doesn't apply to them. But if they are start selling stuff, then part of this apply to them as well. So there is a sort of you know a gray area there. Um, This federal law, this is a federal law, right? So it applies to all Canada, but it doesn't apply to three provinces, Alberta, British Columbia, and Quebec. Why? Because they have something equivalent, right? So even though it doesn't apply to them, but these three provinces, they have something specifically uh, specific to them. So what is PPDA protections? I mentioned some of these already, but customers or consumers of these organizations must give their consent for any personal information that needs to be collected. So if somebody asks you for your, let's say, your personal income, yearly income, and you don't want to share it, then you don't have to share it. Now, they may say, well, sorry, if you don't share this information, we cannot give you service. That's a different matter. But still, nobody can force you to share this information, right? And also, if the information is taken from you, if you give the information, you have the right to ask the bank, tell me, what do you know about me? Right? So, what is the information that you are collecting about me? Also, organizations have to collect only the information that they need. Right? So, if to open a bank account, you need, let's say, your address, your name, your um, your phone number, for example, just so that we know that you are the person that you claim to be, and we know where you live, right? So, but they don't have the right to ask you for your marital status. Does I don't If they don't need it, they shouldn't be collecting it, right? Um, And also, finally, that this is the PPDA includes also um, security safeguards. So the organizations have to apply certain measures to protect the data security. If they don't do that, then they're subjecting themselves to to consequences. Another law in Canada is called the anti-spam legislation. So we talked about spam, and the spam is email that comes unsolicited, so unasked for. It comes to your inbox and tells you, well, there is a deal, there is a business, there's we need to talk to you about maybe having um, selling you stuff, or there is a business opportunity waiting for you, or a lot of other information that's sent to you continuously for no reason, right? Usually it tries to sell you something. That's a spam. In Canada, spam those who send spam, they are violating this law. And to prevent something like this, the spam, from happening, any organization, commercial organization, that needs to send you an email or any electronic message, the message itself, it has to identify the organization itself. So back to the bank, if the bank wants to send you an email, they have to identify themselves in the email. They have to include the mailing address, the phone number, email address, and a web address of the organization. They cannot just send you here a message from Bank of Nova Scotia and that's it. No, they have to put this information so that you can find out if they are legitimate or not. If you are receiving emails because you are a customer of them, then they have to provide you with something that get you out, right? Let's say the banks or any organizations that you are subscribing to, it sends you constant emails, right? That's not considered the spam, by the way. The spam says if you are a customer of a bank, the bank has the right to send you information, right? So it's not spamming if they send you information, even if you are not asking for it. But they have to give you a way to say thank you, unsubscribe me. So in the email has to include unsubscribe link. And finally, they have to be truthful in advertisement, so they don't deceive you in advertisement. And the last thing is the law also requires that a business cannot install a program on a computer or a mobile device before getting the owner's consent. It used to be years ago that you download a free software, right? So you download something that you find free on the internet, you download it, and it's not that you download a virus with it. No, you download another legitimate software, but you didn't ask for it. So you may go and download free software that maybe help you organize your finances. But then with it comes another software that you didn't ask for. Even if that's not virus, even if it's okay, good and all of this, but still it consumes your resources and you didn't ask for it. So this legislation said you cannot do that anymore. If you want to do it, you have to ask for consent. So while you are downloading the software, maybe there's a pop-up window that comes that says, do you like to download this extra thing, yes or no, right? So it gets your consent. So we talked about several federal regulations. Now there is something specific to Nova Scotia, and it has similar uh, counterparts in other provinces. It's called the Nova Scotia Personal Health Information Act. So this, from the name, this governs the collection, use, disclosure, and retention, disposal of, and destruction. So a lot of things for personal health information. So health information from the time they collect information from you until the time this information is destructed, is destroyed. All of this is under the Personal Health Information Act. So the act, on one hand, protects your health information not to be shared with anybody. So you go to the doctor, you have a complaint, the doctor prescribe you medicine, tells you to rest at home, does all of this, but you have the right not to have this information shared with your professor. So a Canadian doctor will never tell your professor or the program about your health situation. That's between you and them, right? But at the same time, if that doctor wants to share information with another medical team for your benefit, right? So that the regulation allow them to do that, right? So it has to balance between your right to privacy and also the need to disclose some information. So this is information, these links give you more details. So I suggest that you take a look at them in order to study. But in general, what I want you to know from this lecture is we have standards and we have regulations, the difference between them. Each standard apply to a specific type of organization. Some of them apply to all types. Some of them apply only to banks. Some of them apply only to government. So you have to keep an eye on this. And also, we saw here from these that this standard does not tell you exactly what to do, just ask you questions. This one has more strict guidelines. The SOC has 3 types of reports. One of them applies to only financial organizations, other apply to everybody. The PCI DSS applies to organizations that deal specifically with credit card information, right? So it doesn't apply to anybody else. If the organization doesn't collect credit cards, this one doesn't apply to them, right? And we have laws. So the laws, some of them are universal, apply to everybody. The Privacy Act apply to information shared with the government of Canada. The right to privacy is universal, applies to everybody. PIPEDA is related to information systems and applies to private businesses and federally regulated businesses as well. There are some exclusions. And we have the anti-spam legislation, and we have the Nova Scotia Health Information Act. All right, so that's the lecture today, and thank you, and see you in another one.